Yeah, so it is interesting that the people that we find that are interested in the book or that are amenable to the arguments of our book, ironically don't share necessarily any one or two or three issue positions in common. But what they do share in common is a commitment to principles, to political principles, and a anxiety about or exhaustion with political tribalism, and an ability to recognize what's happening, thinking, well, I deeply care about issue X or Y or Z, and my party used to be in favor of that or really cared about that, but they've switched on that position, on that issue, and now I feel politically homeless, and I don't just want to go along with my tribe. I actually still care about this issue or this principle, and it still matters to me. And so I think that cognitive dissonance is often the gateway for people to see, oh, I realize now that this left-right framing is not very useful. So I think this issue that you mentioned about, militarism and pacifism is a really interesting one. And it's one of the issues that's probably been flip-flopped on by the two major parties, by those who consider themselves progressive and conservative, the most, maybe more than any other issue in American politics. If we think about, the most famous progressive president at the height of the progressive era, Theodore Roosevelt, he kind of defined what it meant to be a progressive for many Americans for many years. And he was very much a militarist and an internationalist that thought that the United States should carry a big stick and use force around the world. And that was considered progressive for many decades. But you're exactly right. In the 1960s and 70s, that changed as Republicans took control of the presidency and the White House and began intervening more and using military force around the globe. Now it switched where progressives increasingly thought of themselves as anti-war, and conservatives increasingly thought of themselves as more militarist or more interventionist. And this changed again in the 90s when those who supported the Democratic Party wanted to justify some of the foreign interventionism by the Clinton administration, and those who were opposed to the Clinton administration, Republicans in Congress, all of a sudden kind of revived their old non-interventionist or isolationist or anti-war sentiment from previous decades. And then in the early 2000s, during the Bush Jr. administration, they flipped again because now it was Republicans in the White House prosecuting the war in Iraq, and now that was seen as a conservative position to be pro-war, and now it was once again seen as progressive to be anti-war. And then it switched again, and now we have Republicans much more isolationist than they were just 10 or 15 years ago, much less non-interventionist, much more skeptical of military intervention overseas. So that issue is flip-flopped back and forth many times. So I think for someone who really cares about that issue, then I think the left-right framing is even more clearly and visibly faulty and flawed.
Yeah, for me, certainly, and also the fact that I think the most accurate working model when you start to make those realizations that you're talking about is that the tribe that is in power when a war is occurring is in favor of that war.
Yeah.
And the tribe that is out of power when a war is occurring is not in favor of that war. There's certainly bipartisan support for some wars, sure. But and I think this gets back to a lot of your arguments about, say, for example, change or preservation, keeping traditions, right? That's often kind of thought of as a possible essence that separates those ideas, right? Yeah. That, teams tend to be for changes that create their favored policy and against changes that don't.
Yeah.
So no one is really for change or against change in the same way that you pointed out quite well in your book with very compelling evidence that no one's really for big government or small government. They're for the government doing the things that they want the government to do and not doing the things that they don't want the government to do. And when they're criticizing the other team who is trying to do things, they might call that big government, but then they, as you kind of use George Bush Jr. as an example there, right? So maybe you could talk about that a little bit, kind of the big government mythology.
Yeah.